All right, welcome guys, and welcome to Holly. I'm Lou Jury from Relo Business Group, and we've got Holly Middleton from Relo Consulting, and she's the head of consulting, and I'll introduce you to Holly in a second. And I can see that there's already 14 people come on to this webinar, so welcome to everybody. Up the top there's a chat box that allows you to make some chats to us, and put those questions in as they come up, and Holly and I will respond to those questions. Anything around anything digital, if we can't answer it today within the 45 minutes, we will come back to you and take it offline. So thanks again to registering for this Relo Consulting Why Digital Strategy Matters webinar. I think today you're going to get some extremely actionable takeouts that you'll be able to take back into your organizations very quickly. So without further ado, we'll get stuck into the content, and we've got a slide share here. If there is any problems, please pop up your details and the problem on the chat. So we'll dive into the slides that we're going to share today for you, and we'll just bring those up here. Yeah, there's a couple of people. We thought that we'd put ourselves up first, just to very quickly introduce who we are. My name's Lou Jury, of course, and I'm the Managing Director and founder of Relo Business Group. We do a huge amount of things in the digital space, from the consulting and the business improvement of digital right through to the actual implementation and digital marketing through our business, Reload Media. I've got with me today Holly Middleton. Holly is our head of consulting at Relo Consulting, and she's a key innovation specialist around growing businesses from a business growth and also an innovation piece within the digital strategy realm. And she does a huge amount of things such as web consulting and market research, through to a big favourite of yours, Holly, which is customer behaviour and all the customer journey mapping. Definitely, yeah. So I've got one slide and then Holly's got the rest. I thought, guys, I would show you a slide that really encapsulates why Holly and I decided to do this webinar. This is circling the internet. Of course, it comes through places like LinkedIn and things like that. But what it basically shows is that there's a huge amount of confusion in the internet industry from who's doing what. There's a positive, of course. There's a huge amount of opportunity, and there's a huge amount of data. There's a huge amount of options that businesses have within their digital strategy. The biggest challenge that we find when it comes through to a company like Relo Consulting is that what actually do you have to do, and where do you put your hard-earned money, and where do you actually provide the strategy around? And Holly will take you through a journey of some of these areas. But a quick story for you around the Spotify link in the left-hand side there, or the Spotify piece of the pie graph. What's happening these days is you're not just advertising once you get through your digital strategy on places like Google solely anymore. You might actually do Google in conjunction with things like Spotify ads or Pandora ads, or even things like, of course, YouTube. But into areas like the Amazons of the world, and our London office is actually doing a huge amount of that with Spotify at the moment. So the UK guys are actually advertising in these channels. So what we're going to do is take a step back from all this and just show how to actually prepare for the world that happens in 60 seconds and the world of where to put your advertising spends. And of course, keep those any chat questions coming in. Any questions that you have, feel free to dive on the right-hand side there and pop those in. So I'll hand over to Holly.
Great, thanks. Thanks everyone for being here today. So to kick us off, we want to just go dive straight into why digital strategy matters and what we'll be talking through today. So as the slide that Lou just brought up demonstrated, there's so many options available and you really need something to guide that. So digital strategy matters as it's essentially the key to ensuring your use of digital has a clear focus to be consistent, targeted, and efficient at the end of the day. So without that strategic thought behind your use of digital, you really run the risk of having each of your channels working in silos and missing those opportunities to gain the efficiencies that can come from looking at your approach really as a whole and defining some specific channel roles. So to talk through this, just move this over. To talk through this, we'll be starting with what digital strategy really is, what it can do for you, what challenges that can stand in the way that we've come up against or heard from our clients, then going into some of today's mandatory digital strategy inclusions, just to give a bit more clarity around what a digital strategy looks like, then looking at integrating a digital marketing activity so that it's all working in synergy essentially, then how you can measure strategy as opposed to purely tactics, and then also how you can maintain your strategy to keep it going in the long term and to ensure that it doesn't stagnate. So first off, what is digital strategy? We have this in there because we noted there's a range of different people in the webinar today from a lot of different backgrounds. So the word strategy is probably one of the most misused words in the business and marketing space. And often the term strategy and tactics are used interchangeably, which you'd obviously come across as well. So because we're going to be talking about strategy today and have quite a mix of people in here, we want to just quickly run through some of the differences. So the three that we get coming up the most are really strategy, tactics, and plans. So these really range on a scale really of top level to detail, starting with strategy. So this is really the way in which you achieve a set of goals and the why behind that approach. So strategies, they really need a goal and an objective to start, and will then often reference the tactics that they expect to employ as one integrated set of choices which you really need. For an example, an objective for a business may be to launch an entirely new type of software online. The digital strategy may then be to ensure the digital infrastructure is in place before you enter that market via a test phase, whereby your digital efforts could be targeted to markets X, Y, and Z across a range of relevant channels for those markets, thereby reducing the risk and gathering data on a smaller scale. So then you can inform some of your larger efforts. So you can see there that's really top level, and you've got a why. Then you've got your tactics, which are the efforts that you'll engage in when carrying out the strategy. So strategies include tactics, but they're different things. So if we continue on with that example of the test phase strategy, the tactics would be the individual channels that we're recommending to test the specific approach to each channel that we'll be using during the test plan. Great. So example, a tactic within a test strategy may be to split test the use of email marketing during the test phase. So you can uncover those with the highest performance, or to trial a mix of paid search options to which attracts the most qualified leads or conversions. So then there's a plan, which of course is a list of steps that surround how each tactic will be executed, by who and by when. So this is really giving you the roadmap as to exactly what needs to happen, but it again is different to a strategy. Oftentimes the phase 2 of a strategy will be that plan, so you've got those actionable steps, but just important here for us to differentiate. Great. So then it's what impact does a digital strategy have? Because a lot of the times it can seem conceptual or intangible, but we need to talk about exactly what kind of impact it has. So we've now really narrowed it down to the top 3 here. So the first one, direction. So this is essentially so that everyone knows the play. If you think about it as a team on a field, it's the difference between everyone having known the background of the team, having played together in the past, they've got a play in mind, and they're all working towards that goal, as opposed to a team that's never played together, that doesn't know sort of what they're all working towards, and they're all sort of running around, not really getting to that end goal. So if you sort of have a think about it, which are more likely to score, it's going to be the ones that have that clear direction in place. So then it ties objectives to actions. This one's quite important because a lot of the times you'll probably find it as well, and feel free to chat through if you've got some examples of this, is that you'll often be doing a lot of actions, and the second that someone asks, why are we doing this? There's not often a clear answer to that. So having a strategy in place allows you to easily sort of temperature check exactly what you're doing, so that if someone asks you, why are we doing this initiative? Why are we doing it that way? It can be mapped back to the strategy and an objective that you've got for the business. Then you've got a bird's eye view, so for greater visibility of the opportunities. When you're down into, say, the silos of a specific digital channel or an initiative, it's very hard to look outside of that channel and spot some opportunities. And those opportunities could range from opportunities for data transfer, that could range from opportunities for efficiency or use of graphics or materials that you've had from other channels that you can then repurpose and use across others. It's a huge one for content marketing to make sure that you've got an overarching picture of what's happening everywhere so that you can see all the different opportunities to promote that content. It just provides that overarching picture so that you can see things from a step back and then look at how you can optimize that. So then there's the important question of why doesn't everyone have one? So when you can look at the impacts that it can have and the efficiencies that you can gain from having a digital strategy, it seems like a no-brainer that everyone would have one. But what we find is that, you know, as was in the blurb from this webinar with Smart Insights, they found that around 50% of digital marketers don't have a digital strategy to drive their efforts. And when you think about it, that's digital marketers, like that's not even the wider business community. So there's a lot of people out there that don't have one. So it caused us to kind of think, why is it that people don't have these digital strategies? And we're able to narrow it down to about 4 that we came across. So let me know if any of these sound familiar or if there's any others that you've come across as well, and we can go from there. So the first one is, and what you'll notice from these as well, just quickly, is that they are largely people-based. We don't often find that the barrier to digital strategy is budget, because you can have a digital strategy that's incredibly advanced and grand, and you can have a digital strategy that's lean and efficient, but it's more about how you get that incorporated into the business. So the first one is the lack of internal buy-in, both top and bottom. So when you've got a digital strategy that you need to have rolling out across the business, you really need for that to be driven by the leaders of the company. So that's things like senior level management, to really understand the importance of digital and that need for big picture thinking, as opposed to purely focusing on tactics, which I'm sure you'd get the questions on exactly how's Facebook performing, how is PPC performing, but never really how is our overarching digital strategy performing. So you need that buy-in from top level management, and to do that, you can ensure that they're engaged and involved from the very start so that their objectives for the business are heard, and also to tie back and speak their language, essentially, what the outputs of that digital strategy are going to be in relation to what they're looking for the business. So what efficiencies can you gain? What kind of results can you get by having this approach that's going to be looking at it from a whole? And then when you're speaking their language and talking about the value that's relevant to them, that's when you can get that buy-in. Then there's also buy-in from the internal teams, which I can't emphasize enough, particularly in larger companies where you've got an IT department, you've got a communications department, even then additionally a marketing department. You really need to have everyone that's going to be involved in the execution to be involved in that strategy setting, so that everyone knows the reasons why, essentially, behind what they're doing, and why it's so absolutely critical to get everyone involved and working together on this, essentially. So then there's limitations when it comes to understanding the target audience. So we'll go into this a bit more a couple slides later, just around the absolute importance of understanding your target audience. So you need to understand this because it really forms the basis of what you're doing. It's a lot easier to change what you're doing than to try and change what your target audience is thinking, essentially. So you really need to understand that. But a lot of the times, companies big and small, it's quite difficult to nail this down, who your target audience is, what their profile is, what they're thinking and feeling at different times. So for actionable tips, where we often start is you can do surveys, focus groups, depth interviews, which are your primary research. So you're getting the information really from the horse's mouth, so to speak, as to who these people are. But we do understand that there can be limitations on, say, budget or timing. So there's other options that you can start with as well, particularly if you're a smaller business, and that's talking to people that are really at the coalface, that are talking to clients that are interacting quite frequently, that have a bit of a experience and history that they can draw on to pull out some trends that they've found in the target audience, to give them a bit of a profile. So who are they? Where are they from? What do they do? And also a bit more around the softer information. So what are they thinking? What motivates them to come to you? What would demotivate them from coming to you? So that you can get into what information you need to really present if you understand who those people are and where you need to present it across what channels. So another challenge that people come against when they're thinking about digital strategy is purely the time and effort. And I'm not going to tell you that it's easy or that it's only going to take an afternoon to put something like this together. If you're going to put something together that your company is essentially going to be using as the basis from which you're going to carry out a lot of your digital efforts and invest, it does take time. It does require a lot of consideration of what you're doing in the background and what's been done in the past. So I do say that you need to sort of come towards this table with your eyes open around digital strategy and make sure that it's something that's going to stand the test of time and that has that thought and consideration behind it, as opposed to getting together and having something that's a little bit more sort of shooting from the hip, or something that's quite ad hoc in nature, needs to be defined very clearly. And then lastly, we've got the hesitation to change. So this really comes down to purely some human nature, really, in that people are usually likely to, I guess, not avoid change, but less likely to lean towards it naturally. So we know that by setting a new digital strategy, it's often going to mean that you need to move away from your current path or head in a direction that might be uncertain. But to really encourage change as a positive thing, you need to do this within the teams again, and it needs to be reiterated from the top what the positive long-term effects are, and also what short-term, I guess, momentum you can expect from some of these digital strategies. So you really tie it into the long-term, but also the quick wins, so that you can actually communicate to your team exactly what they're going to see and what kind of impacts it's going to have on a day-to-day basis or for the business in general. So this will help you, I guess, get out of your comfort zone if you can really look into what the impacts are going to be for your business, but also be completely aware of these types of challenges that you're going to come up against. So I haven't had anything come through from the chat yet, but do let me know if any of these sound familiar, or if there's some that potentially don't fit into those four categories, because I know there's a lot of people. I mean, the reason you probably signed up to this webinar is to find out how you can get a digital strategy. So what's kind of been behind, or how you can improve it, what's been behind any sort of hesitation to go down that route, and then we can address those as we work through the rest of the webinar.
Great, we might just pause there as well. I'm going to pop up an offer, guys, that basically is a bit of an offer that allows you to click into another part of our business, which is called Reload Media. And while Holly takes you through the next stage of the presentation, feel free to go and download this great digital marketing tool, which is basically a document that allows you to see over 50 of the top tools that are out there. So once you've done your strategy, you can actually really sink your teeth into some of these tools that are going to make a big difference. And this has been written by the Reload Media content team. And there was plenty of strategy, Holly, put into this one, and I'll pop the offer up there for everybody to have a look. And just stay tuned as well, because there's going to be a great offer for everybody at the end who is using the webinar software with a exciting offer that you've put up, Holly. And we'll come to that one at the end. But yeah, reiterating Holly's point there, any questions, that would be great. So thanks to Elle there. Elle, thanks for your comment about downloading the toolkit. There's plenty out there, and we thought we'd bundle in the top 50. So guys, like Elle, I encourage you to have a look at it. Holly, I'll hand back to you. I'll click back up into my presentation here and allow you to keep going. So yeah, any other questions, guys, please feel free to ask them.
Great. Thanks, Lou. That really is a fantastic resource. I recommend downloading it. So the next stage I wanted to go through really was, what are the mandatory elements of a digital strategy? So if you're looking at putting one of these together yourself, what are the key things that really need to be in there to make sure you've got the groundwork to set this strategy and then run with it in execution? So I'll work through some of these and give a bit of an example of what some of them can look like. If you do have any questions, let me know as we go through. Otherwise, we can address some of those at the end. Great. So what goes into a digital strategy? The first one you need is where you're coming from, or what you'll often hear termed as your current state. So if you're trying to find out where you're going, you really need to know where you're starting from. So taking a really good look at your business, digital, and your marketing basket, and essentially laying everything out on the table so you can see everything that you've got, because even though you're looking to the future with your digital strategy, you really need to understand where you're coming from, so then you can set some realistic boundaries around where you can get, how quickly you can get there, and then also what you can leverage in terms of strengths that you've exhibited in the past. So essentially then also, if you haven't been carrying out any digital strategy, you are really starting from a clean slate, but that can always be a positive as well, rather than having to look back at some of the things that you've been doing and making some of the hard decisions around which ones to kind of leave behind. So, and that's a key point. I just want to jump in there as well, Holly, that often it's good to get in some consultants who have a fresh set of eyes, who aren't in the business as usual on a daily basis of an organisation, and to sort of wipe the slate clean. So we see that quite often. And we have clients flying in from different parts of Australia just so they get away from, the clutter, if you like, of daily business climate, and then they can do that. So yeah. No, definitely. Getting a fresh set of eyes and a fresh environment to talk about these things, you can really see some great results. So in addition to looking at where you're coming from to set the boundaries, it's also a really great exercise to set some benchmarks. So when we're looking at something like strategy, which is a little bit harder to measure, if you have a clear understanding of where you currently came from in an overarching picture, then that helps to provide that benchmark if you're going to measure against it in future. Great, so an example of a business who's defined where they currently are, they may be in a situation where they've been using social media, email marketing, remarketing, and maybe a bit of on and off radio. They found their approach to be a bit ad hoc and aren't getting the consistency across their efforts. They can see that they've got quite a few competitors in their space that are starting to get more advanced in digital, and can see that their sales are beginning to decline. So they've usually got a marketing plan that you can use as well, but not a particular focus on digital. And then they know internally that they've got just one resource that can dedicate time to focus on the digital strategy, and therefore they need an approach that can be efficient and targeted. And this one also has a great relationship with their web developer. So that's a bit of a sort of summarized example of what your kind of current state can be boiled down to, just to give you an idea of the kind of things that you're looking to define. So the next one in there is where you want to get to, or more commonly known as your goals and your objectives. So you'll mostly already be aware of the importance of those objectives, because as I said with the play example, that you can't really know where you're getting to without that clear goal. So it's like, again, starting a road trip without knowing your destination at the end of the day. So they're absolutely critical when defining your strategy. So for this, I really recommend that you start at the business level, even though it might seem a little bit left of center to start looking at digital objectives by looking at the business objectives, but they all need to sort of fall out from one another. So you start at your overarching business objectives, then you look at how marketing is going to play a role in general in achieving those objectives. Then from that, you can narrow it down even further to a digital objective. And the purpose of this is so that you can say, my digital objective is X, which is going to fulfill this marketing objective, which is going to contribute towards fulfilling this business objective. And that way you can have your entire business in alignment with what you're doing on digital. Great. All right, so to, I guess, then look at where you're going from there, you need to define the why. So this is the business logic behind your objectives, which, as we said, should be following the business marketing and digital approach. But it's always a good idea, even if you haven't already done that, you've got existing objectives, to really just temperature check against why you're doing it. And to test this, I highly recommend an approach called the why analysis. Let me know if you're familiar with it in the comments. It's an incredibly simple tool, but it allows you to really get to the heart of the problem, a solution, or an objective. And you do this by simply stating your objective and then asking why. You write down the answer that comes from that, and then you ask why again. And then you answer that question and then ask why one more time, that you can usually get to the root of the cause. So for an example, an objective may be increase engagement across social channels. And you go, why? And it might be to increase the reach of our content. Why? To better engage with our target market. And you can even go a step further and say why. And that might be to develop a relationship with them beyond a transactional one. So you really know that that's because a relationship with clients can then lead to loyalty and positive word of mouth. And this information, while it may seem quite obvious as to the why, you really need to define it so that you can just make sure all your efforts are working towards that goal. Great. So then you need to define who your audience is and why they need what they do. So and it's often audiences, I've got to say. A lot of times people can get quite caught up in a single target market, but often you'll have a target market or a core target market, and then from there you'll have segments, and you need to define who those segments are so that you're really promoting to your core but not alienating the segments that are also of high value. And without knowing who those people are and those segments, it really is nearly impossible to know if you're sending them the right message or potentially alienating others from sort of being attracted to your brand. And the starting point of this, as I was saying before, can be having those conversations with your customer service team on a frequent basis, or looking at the demographics and buying behavior in your database. This is something we often help companies with. They'll get us in for workshops to have these discussions and really extract that information from your teams or your database. And then, of course, there's the route of primary research. So sending out those customer surveys or having a focus group, which many people don't realize are quite accessible now. So it's a lot less expensive than what people think in terms of market research, that you can have quite a nimble survey go out there and get some incredibly invaluable information that can then go out to not just your digital marketing teams, but also your marketing teams, comms, PR can be used across the board. Great. So then there's what you've got to do. So this essentially is the crux of your strategy. Once you've looked at the background information that's going to equip you to actually make those recommendations, you need to look at exactly what you've got to do. And this can be quite a daunting one, as it requires that creativity and assessment of all that information. But I often find it easiest for businesses to sort of start with the 5 key areas of strategy, which, if you're familiar with or have heard of before, it's your arenas. So where exactly you're going to compete. So you might be saying, we're going to compete in this market with this type of consumer. The vehicles is the second key area, which is what you're going to be using to get there. And that might be channels or other initiatives. Then you need to have the third, which is the source of differentiation and approach. So how are you going to do things differently to suit your specific needs and the needs of your business to differentiate your approach? And then the fourth is in what stages you'll carry it out. So a lot of times there's a mistake that people write a digital strategy and then they aim to carry it out on day one. Everything gets started, everything kicks off, but we usually recommend a phased approach for this kind of thing, so that you're getting the system set up and the infrastructure there to make sure that you're doing it correctly and as effectively with as little sort of risk as possible. And then the final is the economic logic. And this really comes back to your business objectives that we were speaking about earlier. So really looking at why you're doing this and how it's going to help your business. So if you're investing in digital, you really need to know why and what the purpose is and what you're going to try and get out of it. And that'll really give you a good start. Then there's a bit more detail, which you go into how you're going to do it. So from a digital strategy perspective, this usually starts off with the digital strategy or the digital marketing channels, tools that you're going to be using. Not the exact detail of step 1, step 2, step 3 for implementing, but usually the channels, their purpose, and what role they're going to fulfill in the wider strategy, so that you've got that guidance when in future you are measuring their performance, that you know exactly what their purpose was in the overarching strategy. Great. So that gives you a bit of an overview of the mandatory elements. If there's any there that you're missing, feel free to send through some questions about it, or get in touch with us after the webinar. Great. So then we're looking at how you ensure your efforts are integrated. So here I'm not going to go into the specific technical requirements of integrating, your CRM with your email marketing tool and what you're doing on social. It's more an overarching approach to make sure that what you're doing is speaking to everything else you're doing. So the key things from here are keeping a bird's eye perspective. So really making an active effort not to get that siloed approach that I spoke about at the start of the webinar, making sure that you're always taking that step back and having a look at the overarching strategy, so as to define any further opportunities for integration, so where things can be working together. Which leads us on to the teamwork between tactics. So you need to be looking at your tactics as essentially a team all working towards that same end goal. So when you're working in a team, you're often talking to one another, you're often using the strengths of another member of that team. Digital tactics need to be exactly the same. If social's doing something that's particularly strong and you need to leverage that in what you're doing in email marketing or PPC, you really need to make those connections. And it can be as simple as having that dedicated time to have a step back and look at, okay, this one's not performing as well. How can our other tactics help this one? Or how can we really make sure that we're streamlining that connection and defining those opportunities, which is the next point. Then there's keeping the lines of communication open. So this isn't just, as I was saying then, between the tactics, but more importantly between your teams, your suppliers. If you're having meetings around digital strategy or where you're going or any adjustments to your digital strategy, I highly recommend getting suppliers involved, getting the different teams involved, as I was saying, IT, communication, to make sure everyone's aware of where it's at, what's happening with it, that it's not sort of stagnating, that it's still going. And then, of course, don't forget the offline. So I've got a slide here that has a nice quote. So customers do not recognize lines, and nor should we. Online, offline, above the line, below the line, we really need to think and deliver experiences and marketing without delineation. So we need to start looking at it as marketing as opposed to digital marketing and traditional marketing. So when you're looking at your digital strategy, even though it's quite specific online, there's different requirements and approaches, you need to also be thinking about how you can leverage offline and how offline can leverage digital to get that overarching approach. Great. So this one, I won't go into too much detail, but you can have a look at this once we put the slides up as well. It's essentially the different levels of integration that different businesses have. And you don't have to start at level 4 strategic integration, where you've got your whole company being driven by the integration and your corporate strategic planning using customer information insights. That would be great. But we understand that businesses do have to start somewhere. So there's these different levels that you can work towards. So starting with the tactical, which is where a lot of people are at the moment. You've probably started engaging in some digital channels, some offline, but what you need to get to, and hopefully off the back of this webinar, is at least that level 2. So really starting to redefine the scope of marketing communication, so it's considering all of them, the brand message and that integrated approach. Then you get to level 3, which is the application of information technology, when you're starting to get your systems and your infrastructure in place to really have it ticking along quite autonomously to a degree. So it's that efficient approach. And then there's the final, where it's absolutely ingrained throughout the entire organization. So having a look at that, let us know whereabouts you find your organization or your team at the moment. And while you're doing that, we'll look at how you measure your strategy. So this is an important one. Lots of people don't look at how you measure your strategy as opposed to measuring your tactics. So when you're measuring your tactics, as we've got here, there's always going to be channel metrics. There's always going to be a way to measure in some form the performance of a channel that you're working on. However, those really aren't the measure of an overarching strategy, because you may have one area that's completely smashing it and you may have another that's falling down. And because of that combination, you're not achieving those objectives that you set at the start. So what you need to look at is ensuring the tactics that are measured are assessed against those original purposes that you set out for each channel. So what was the original purpose of email? What was the original purpose of video advertising? So that you really are assessing the performance based on that. Then you need to look at strategy-wide performance tracking. So having that dedicated time, might be once a quarter, to look at the whole suite and temperature check it and against that benchmark that you set at the start, and also exactly what you're hoping to achieve. And that might be setting interim milestones of what that would look like if you're achieving that strategy, but making sure you're looking at it from an overarching perspective. Then there's how you maintain your strategy. So making sure that it stays on track. So digital strategy needs to be flexible. The main thing here is you don't set a strategy in 2016 and then don't touch it until 2020. It needs to be something that's adaptable and quite agile to the changes, because we all know that there's different things coming up. Consumers are, adjusting their requirements at a rate of knots. We need to make sure that the strategy is evolving with that. So oftentimes you can do that via strategic reviews. Again, it could be quarterly to make sure you're giving your strategy enough time to get into the swing of things. And if it's not working, look at ways that you can adapt. You still might have those core business objectives, but the strategy can slightly change tack there. There's also team communication, as I was saying. Make sure that any wins that you're having from the digital strategy are communicated. Any next steps, we need to really push this across the line, that everyone's aware of what's happening next, and that it's something that isn't just another initiative that sort of goes on the shelf and is never brought up again in meetings. And then at the end, ensure it's really fluid, but guided by those core principles. So it can be flexible, but you don't want to be changing your strategy every 2 weeks. Great. So that takes us to some of just the key takeaways. I know there's a lot of information in there. Strategy can be quite broad, so there's often those branches that come off it that you can spend another 2 hours talking about quite easily. But really, in a nutshell, it's digital strategy needs buy-in. You need to have the whole team involved and on board with this kind of thing. You do need to define your current state for some realism in your future approach, so that you know what you're working with currently. You need to define your objectives, starting at business, then marketing, and then digital, so that you can easily tie it back to what the overarching company is looking to achieve. Then you need to temperature check your reasoning by doing that why analysis and getting into a bit more detail as to exactly why you're doing what you're doing, so that it has a lot more purpose. Then there's defining your target market, doing that via talking to your teams, or actually carrying out some of that primary research via suppliers or internally. Then building out that strategy by looking at those 5 areas that we discussed. So your arenas, your vehicles, your stages, your differentiators, and then that economic logic. And then keeping that bird's eye view to really ensure that you're spotting those opportunities for integration, and that you're measuring the strategy as a whole. And finally, if I was going to leave you with anything before I lose my voice, it's that nothing is set in stone. This digital strategy can't just become a document that sits on the shelf. It has to be flexible for what's going to change in future, which is a given. Great.
That's great.
Thanks.
Excellent. Some amazing takeouts there, Holly, and hopefully your voice. Have a glass of water, and I'll take over for a sec. I'm just going to pop up another offer, guys, that Holly's actually put together. And I'll take away that one there, and I'm just going to put up this exciting one. Basically, what Holly's offering is a target market profiling workshop, and it's to the value of $3,000. So it's one of Holly's big consulting sessions that she does, and anybody that's part of this webinar right now can actually have access to that. So just click that link on the webinar, and you've got a special access point. Unfortunately, people who are watching this in a delayed broadcast won't actually be able to have that access to that target market workshop. But of course, get in touch with reloadconsulting.com and Holly if you need to. So we've got a couple more minutes for any questions. And there is one that's popping up, and it's Susie. Hi, Susie. How are you going? Ensuring tight connectivity between all the various channels across digital can be a challenge. Absolutely. That is something that comes in all the time, doesn't it, Holly? In terms of there's connectivity between people and systems. And I've seen a lot of problems between systems actually cause people to have problems as well. When you have legacy systems that don't communicate and have connectivity, and their legacy and the APIs don't work and things like that, it's very hard to try and get the digital strategy even up and running when the board are just trying to keep the business going. What's your one tip for that type of sort of statement from Susie there that is around the challenge that they have?
I think it comes down to, I guess, the traditional organizational structures that we find. There's usually a digital team, an offline team, or there might be specific people in control of different channels. But where the sort of looseness comes with connecting those channels is that there isn't really someone accountable or responsible for making that happen. And what I usually recommend is to make sure that there is someone within your organization who is the champion of digital strategy integration and makes sure that they're the ones that are looking out for those opportunities, and they're the ones that are talking to each team and essentially acting as that glue to find out where there's opportunities. From the technical side of things, there's always going to be those I guess, hiccups to overcome, but if someone's not looking out for them, or if someone's not in control of making that happen, it's a lot slower of a process.
That's incredibly good advice, and the key word there is glue. You definitely need someone who's the glue to pull all that together, and often marketing managers actually have to appoint someone that can do that for them, because they're so busy doing everything in the marketing gamut that they need someone to actually become the digital strategy manager, and that's often the people that you, Holly, work with to try and get that roadmap sort of consolidated before you head off down this path. So,
exactly. And they don't necessarily have to be digital strategy experts. Oftentimes they'll come to us for that kind of work, but then once they've got that as the base, then it's up to them to just make sure that it's maintained, and they're essentially the custodian of that digital strategy moving forward, and then can spot those opportunities or come back and have a chat to us about how else it can adapt in future.
That's great. We don't have any other questions come up, but I do encourage you to click on that link. It will take you off to our contact page to get in touch with Holly and just mention this target market profiling workshop because Holly will be able to pop in. We've got about 15 seconds left. One final question. How long does this normally take for the standard small to medium enterprise? How long would putting a digital strategy together take? Is it a short-term thing, or is it are these things happening over 8 to 12 weeks or 6 months or 12 months? What's roughly some basic timeframes for companies?
Basic timeframes, I'll say small, medium and large, because they are very different at very different levels of what they're sort of looking to do and how many other background systems they've got to consider. So I'd say for small, you can get something put together in about 4 to 5 weeks because you've got sort of less of that background information to really sift through. Then medium, I'd say it's more 5 to 6, and then large, you're looking at about 8 weeks. And that's the process of understanding your customers, understanding your background, what information that you need to really go into that strategy, and then looking at really a bit more around the specifics of how you're actually going to get that off the ground. Excellent.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Holly, and I'm glad to see. Thanks, David, about supporting Holly's voice.
I'll get some lozenges.
Yeah, we've got some soothers ready to go. And thanks to Susie for those comments and Elle as well. So thanks, guys. We're going to log off, and you've got the Twitter handle there, and you've got the Reload Consulting domain.
Do get in touch.
And please do get in touch. Thanks, Holly.
Thanks.
Cheers.